Okay, we're going to pick up where we left off in chapter 6. Okay, so one of the strategies to facilitate communication is anticipatory strategies. And this is something that I mentioned in class. You can be used in a classroom, in a job setting, where the individual is provided information ahead of time, um, preparing your patients for whatever task they will be encountering or whatever situation they will be encountering, such as a job interview, taking the SATs if they're younger, taking the GREs if they're college age, what have you. And so anticipatory strategies are very helpful. I also throw in there giving students a list of vocabulary words. Now we're talking about those that are in school, but giving them vocabulary words ahead of time to allow them to prepare for the class. There are some what we call maladaptive strategies. Bluffing is the most common, which is essentially, and we'll talk about it, but it's essentially where you kind of pretend to understand and just kind of try to keep the conversation going, even though you're not understanding what's being said. Withdrawal, dominating conversations is another, and then developing these negative feelings. Repair strategies are extremely important, and oftentimes individuals need, they develop these naturally, but some need assistance with developing repair strategies. And basically, it's when a breakdown in communication occurs, how do you fix that? Okay. And the breakdown occurs when one person in this conversation or communication partner doesn't recognize the other's message. Okay. So we'll talk about repair strategies. Here are some specific repair strategies. Repetition, obviously, is a simple one. Rephrasing, so asking the individual to rephrase what they said in a different way. Remember, I said if you're ever communicating with somebody who has hearing loss, it is important not to ask them to repeat multiple times. Or for you, I'm sorry, not to ask them to repeat, for you not to repeat the same utterance the same way multiple times. So try to rephrase that for them. There could be particular words that they just don't understand. So elaboration, simplifying your message. A lot of times in audiology clinic, students first early in clinic, during their first experiences, they give instructions on hearing testing that are just way too complex for an individual who has hearing loss, and they never follow it. So I tell them just to say, okay, push the button when you hear the beep. That's it, right? Don't give them a bunch of instructions, complex instructions. Gaining information about the topic, confirming what's said, providing feedback, writing something if needed, if absolutely required, and then if both parties can do finger spelling, that can help the situation. So non-specific strategies are asking what, pardon me, just shrugging your shoulder, I don't understand what's being said. Those aren't really as useful as the more formal repair strategies. So in this visual, it shows when there's a communication breakdown that's detected, what course of action. Are you going to use a repair strategy? You're just going to disregard what was said, or are you going to use bluffing, which is essentially pretending like you understand, but not really understanding. So here's an example of a quickly detected breakdown. So the midterm exam is next Friday, right? And then James says, I'm going to be working on my report on Friday. No, I'm asking you if the exam is on Friday. Very simple. Bluffing, pretending to understand, behaving in a way that suggests you understand when you really don't. And in the audiology clinic, I think bluffing at times that are inappropriate will often bring patients in to get evaluated and potentially get hearing aids, because I mean, I've had numerous patients who said, yeah, I was talking to so and so and he said, oh yeah, my my wife died, and somebody else, and they heard something differently and said, oh, that's nice, something like that, where they're just trying to work their way through a situation, and it was, their response wasn't appropriate for what was said. So that happens quite a bit. So social stigma is having a condition that is devalued because it deviates from the norm and results in a negative status being placed upon that person. Self-stigma is when that occurs and does that to themselves, basically. And will often lead to bluffing because they just don't want people to know they have hearing loss. They've kind of, they're in that stigma stage, if you will. So here's an example of bluffing, right? You can read it. I'm not going to go through it. But person gives some kind of negative news, and the person with hearing loss says, oh, that's great, oh, that's nice, and that sort of thing. Here's some research on repair strategies. Repetitions are really less effective than restructured messages. I say that all the time. Make sure, and it's tough, right? You're used to just repeating, but when you're working with somebody with hearing loss or dealing with somebody with hearing loss, it's very important not to repeat over and over again. Non-specific repair strategies can indicate the point of communication breakdown and preserve the flow of conversation. We'll talk about conversational flow. Here's some styles that conversational styles that I always talk about: passive aggressive, and then assertive. So a passive communication style is somebody that bluffs, speaks softly, avoids interactions, right? They're very withdrawn. Aggressive is when they're very demanding, intimidating. They're kind of more in your face type communication styles. Now, again, remember that individuals with hearing loss, particularly more, severe to profound losses, they struggle a lot to communicate in a hearing world. And so sometimes you have to realize their angst, their anger perhaps is not so much directed at you. It's just the difficulty they encounter. Passive aggressive, right? We all know somebody who's passive aggressive, and but that's another communication style. And then assertive is really where you want to get people, right? You want to get them to be assertive, where they take responsibility, they respect the rights, they of the other communication partners, but they're honest and they're upfront. And they're considerate. That's really where you want your patients to be, is in that assertive. Here's a visual that looks at communication behaviors. You have interactive, non-interactive, and then dominating. And you really kind of, I really think this visual shows how there are times where you want to be interactive, and times where you may not want to be as interactive for various reasons. And there might be times where you want to not dominate the conversation, but kind of be in between dominating and interactive. I would say like this is the assertive area, right? Where you need to be somewhat, I don't want to say forceful, but firm, but not dominating. And so, that was just some information about different communication styles. Again, this falls into oral rehab in kind of the counseling part of the process, in terms of helping somebody realize situations, how to deal with communication breakdowns and so forth. The next chapter, chapter 7, talks more about assessing that in formal and informal ways. Okay, so that's chapter 6, and I will send some chapter 7 along as well.